Okay, so welcome back. This is part 2, looking at love in the 7th house and relationships from an astrological perspective. And our focus today will be on general guidelines of the placement of the 7th house Lord. Now remember, the 7th house itself represents that area of life of partnerships, whether it's business partnerships, intimate partnerships, whatever it may be. That's what that represents. It's the area of life. So it's like if you could put relationships in a box, your particular relationships in a box, that's the 7th house for relationships. So whatever goes into that box, whatever throws its influence towards that box, that's showing us how relationships are getting impacted through the consciousness of the planets. The 7th Lord itself, that represents the, if you can think about it like the consciousness of relationships in regards to how you work with relationships. So what is your conscious attention doing in regards to relationships? So 7th house itself, that's the area of life. It's like your home in a sense. What goes into the home influences the home. So if the planet's in the 7th, it influences the home. Now, the 7th house Lord, that's like the ruler of the home, the owner of the home. So that's you, essentially. So what do you do? What do you bring into the 7th house? 7th house Lord. How is the owner of the home or the owner of relationships getting impacted by other areas of the chart? So we have to learn to, again, thinking like an astrologer, see this kind of interplay. The 7th house is the space. The 7th house Lord is the consciousness, the activity, the choices you make, in a sense, consciously, hopefully consciously. So let's consider the placement of house lords. Now, if you have the 7th house Lord in the 1st, this can be helpful for relationships. And we have to remember that all these things that we're talking about, when I say that this can be helpful or good, that's if there are positive benefic planets impacting that 7th Lord, or positive Logitatia Vashtas impacting that 7th Lord, or positive yogas, whatever it might be. If it has negative impacts on it, negative aspects or whatever it may be, negative dignity, then just take the reverse of what I'm saying, or try to interpret it in the opposite direction. And this is one of those things that many people miss when they read astrological texts, is they try to read the text literally, and they don't realize that the writer is hoping that you're smart enough to see that if it's good, of course this makes sense. But if it's negative, well, we need to reverse it and read a little more, deduce a little more from it. So keep that in mind. So why is the 1st house holding the 7th Lord good? Because now you have the 7th Lord, which represents relationships, coming to you, the 1st house, the ascendant. So typically that makes you more attractive in relationships. It makes people more, they come to you more so within relationships. This will be in a good way if there's positive influences. This will be in a bad way if there are negative influences. The 2nd house. Now, the 2nd house having the 7th Lord, so it's the 7th Lord going into the 2nd, this can show that you get involved in relationships where you financially gain from the spouse. The spouse becomes involved in supporting your finances. This can be somewhat difficult for the spouse's health. And why is that? Because the 2nd house in your chart, if we treat the 7th house as the ascendant for a spouse, then that puts the ascendant Lord in the 8th. So if there's some negative impacts on that particular planet, that can be bad for the spouse's longevity or long-term health. 3rd house. So if we have the 7th Lord in the 3rd, this can show an easy fulfillment of desires through relationship. Typically this isn't considered very favorable, because the happiness of marriage traditionally was meant to be about building one's legacy, having children. So it's less beneficial from that standpoint. But in our current culture, it can be okay, because the third house does deal with personal desires and hobbies, adventure. So that can show going on adventures with our partners, or having our desires filled through our partners. If it's negative, it can sometimes indicate a person who is possibly unfaithful at times. Again, because they have a lot of interest in other people. So they like to have hobbies with other people, if you could think about it that way. It just depends on how it's situated. So we don't want to, again, be too judgmental here, because it can go many different ways based on many different combinations. And understanding Jaimini astrology can be very helpful for you to sort this out, because you might see this and you jump to the conclusion that someone's going to be unfaithful. Well, if you know Jaimini astrology and you know the influences to look for on the Atmakaraka for the person whose chart you're looking at, or the Darakaraka for their spouse, you can see, are there actually indications for unfaithfulness? Because that's going to show how is it going to actually be. Whereas when we're using these kind of house lords, that'll show, is this person going to get in situations where that might be a possibility? So again, Jaimini, as I understand it, as I've been taught, that's more so how is it going to be? So how is the person going to be? Versus what we're looking at is there going to be potentials or possibilities for a situation to occur? Just because there's a possibility doesn't mean it's going to happen unless that person already has an indication for that in themselves. We have to remember this. And the opposite is true. A person might have the potential to do something bad or less than savory, but if they're not put in a situation where that can occur, it might not happen. So this is why astrology is so interesting and fascinating, because there's all these complexities, which is as it should be, because life is complex as well. We don't want to make life seem like it is not, because there's a lot to it. Psychologically, physically, spiritually, energetically, many different layers. Now, fourth house. If we take the seventh lord and put it in the fourth house, positively, this can be very good for a happy, comfortable relationship. It shows a closeness, a heart connection to the spouse, because that's what the fourth house represents. One feels at home within relationships. If it's negative, the opposite is true. One never feels comfortable within relationships. One always feels that one is emotionally deprived within relationships. Fifth house. This is said to be good for marriage and children. Why? Well, because, first of all, we see that the seventh lord is going into the house that deals with our, our legacy. It shows a closeness of spouse to children. It can show creativity within the marriage and relationship. It can show romance within the relationship. Again, negatively, so we have negative connotations on this particular planet or this particular house. This can give difficulty with finding happiness through children, through marriage. Meaning a person might have the seventh lord in the fifth and they end up being happy in marriage, but then they have children and it all goes downhill. And we see that all the time. Some people have children, they fall more deeply in love. Other people have children, the marriage falls apart. So we can see these sort of things. The seventh lord and the sixth, this can be difficult because the sixth house is a house of enemies, which if you take the seventh lord, which is your partner, and you put it in the sixth, that's more likely turning your partner into some sort of enemy. Now it can be that your partner helps to improve you, because the sixth house is also the house of improvement. It's an upachaya house, a growing house. But when there's a lot of negative impact, Saturn, Mars, Rahu, 12th house lord, 8th house lord hitting this as well, just as an example, this can create a lot more discord and separation lost within the marriage or relationships. 7th house. Well, you have a planet in its own sign if it's in the 7th house. 7th house lord in the 7th house typically indicates success in marriage. Although, of course, if it's a malefic planet, this can still cause some marital discord or a little bit too much aggressiveness or harshness within the relationship. So remember to consider this on a much broader scale. 8th house. 8th house shows an innate weakness. That's the house of the flaw. So when you have the 7th lord in the 8th, that shows an innate weakness to be able to maintain a stable connection to a partner. Again, that's if this is negative. Because the 8th house shows those things which are hidden, but are also not sufficient unto themselves. So it's like if you're, the way it was described to me, if you're going down the road and you just bought a new car, there might be a problem with one of the tires, but you don't know it because the car is brand new. And then you hit a pothole and the tire flies off and you have a serious crisis to deal with. That was a hidden weakness. So oftentimes when the 7th Lord is in the 8th, that gives a hidden weakness which can result in divorce or a loss of marriage partner. Now 9th house. This is said to be positive because now we have a relationship based on inner values, mutual support, a relationship based on dharma, looking beyond the passion, looking beyond the 7-month window of all the hormones where you feel that you've fallen in love, and actually seeing much further down the road. Remember, the 9th house is similar to the 9th sign. What's the 9th sign? It's Sagittarius. And what is Sagittarius represented by but the archer, the bowman who's shooting into the distance, shooting for the future. And the same thing can be true when we have the 7th Lord in the 9th. This shows a marriage that can look to the long term, can aim for more dharmic goals, all things being equal. And if Rahu's there, that can shake it up a little bit. Actually, if any malefic planet's there, that can make it a little harder. And of course, you have to look at the Baladi of Ashtas too. But in general, that can be helpful. In the 10th, this can show a partnership in which one, they work together. So the careers can be similar. Or one can assist one's partner within the career. Or the partner is very active within the world. So you can have a very active partner because the 10th house is the house of activity. If it's a malefic, that can show a partner which dominates you to a degree, because the 10th house dominates the rest of the chart. So having a malefic there, that can make partners dominant over you. If it's a benefic, that can show a partner who showers grace on you, who showers opportunities on you. By being in relationships, you're very much supported in your activity within the world. 11th house. They say this gives a happy and successful marriage. I think that's probably true, because it would give fulfillment of personal desires similar to the 3rd house. It would also show a marriage improving over time, because the 11th house is an Upachaya house. At times, this can show a romantic relationship, a very romantic relationship. It can also show a very social relationship. So there might be a large social network around your relationship, which is helpful. It helps to support a relationship. 12th house. Well, this can go either way. 12th house can show either losing a partner. It can show marriage to foreigners or someone or having long-distance relationships. It can show a spiritual, contemplative partner. Or it can show separation and divorce or a short life for the spouse. How do you determine which way it's going to go? Well, you need to consider what is the planet that we're talking about. You need to consider what other houses does this planet rule. You need to consider the natural, the dignity of the planet, the avashtas on the planet, aspects on the planet. So there's numerous things that you want to consider before you jump to a conclusion based on what we've just gone over. There's numerous things to consider. So again, thinking like an astrologer, that's what we want to develop. Okay, so these are some ideas in regards to 7th Lord. What does it mean to have the 7th Lord in different houses? And again, to refer back to The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2, there's a whole section on house lords in other houses. And these are based on the Parashara Bhava Yogas, which will help you get a sense of how each planet is going to work and in what area of life. Also, we try to go over, or I tried to go over in that book, how to figure out the specific details, because within those Bhava Yogas there's a list of things that can possibly happen. And in order to understand what's going to happen, you have to, again, be able to understand what is the planet that's doing this in the first place. Who are we talking about? Not just is it the 8th Lord in the 7th house, or 7th Lord in the 8th, but is it a benefic? Is it a malefic? Is it Saturn? Is it Mars? Is it Rahu? Is it Jupiter? All that's going to color it. And then you have to consider what other houses does it rule. So all these things have to go into understanding these possibilities within the chart. And again, I'd like to encourage you to consider the classes we're doing this year in 2015, the spring and fall semester classes. Again, go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. Look at the post that has the syllabus on that. It should be the first or second one on that main page. And see if it's something of interest to you. In that class, we are going to spend a lot of time figuring out how to think like an astrologer. And we can do that for any house, not just the 7th house for marriage and relationships, but for any house in particular. And how to tie that into Vargas, how to tie that into transits, how to tie that into dashas to see when are these karmas going to manifest. Because the when is just as important as the what. It may be that you see something, but it doesn't manifest until a person's 83. They might have 50 years to go before they get there. So is that going to be something that you need to talk about right now? Maybe not. All these things come together when you are trying to think like an astrologer, to understand your own life and understand the lives of others. Now, I'll take it a little bit further today because, again, these are videos specifically on relationships. And one of the things that you need to do before you start trying to define yourself through what we've just discussed, you need to remember that you don't necessarily need astrology to know what your relationship karma is like. You just need to stop, take a deep breath, review your past relationships, or lack thereof, or however many there have been. That's going to give you a very strong indication of what your relationship karma is like. Then, once you've done that, you can stop and you can ask yourself, let's say relationships have ended. When these relationships have ended, what was I so frustrated about? Why did these relationships end? And write down those thoughts that you have, those feelings that you have, because that's going to show you what are the karmas that are contributing to your lack of relationships. And you can think about what made these relationships strong. Write those things down. Those will show the strengths that you have, again, without even looking at astrology, to give you a sense of where might you need to do some personal work. Where do you have strengths that you can build upon? These are ways that you can get into astrology without going through all the number crunching. Or as I've been telling you how to think like an astrologer, if you just look at your life, just look at your life. And that's somewhat hard to do because you have an idea of how it should be, and you're more than likely going to write down your expectations and how it should have been versus how it actually went. So it may be helpful to do this with another person, someone that knows you well, and try to listen with an open mind to what they might have to say. But this will help you to understand your relationship karma without astrology. And then, if you need some confirmation, if you need some assistance working through these karmas, contact an astrologer. Don't write them and say, when am I going to get married? When am I going to meet that special someone? What's going to be the color of their skin? What are they going to do for work? Are we going to have children? Don't ask them those things. You can if you want, because many astrologers probably enjoy doing that. But if you haven't had much luck in relationships, the question might be to ask the astrologer, okay, this is where I've been, and you can describe that to them. So what do I need to do, based on my chart? What do you see that I need to work through to prepare me for having relationships? Or, more importantly, what am I supposed to be doing right now based on this chart? What are the trends supporting? Maybe it's not relationships, as we've talked about before. And this will start to get you more in harmony with your life, with self-knowledge, with personal understanding, so that you can grow through your relationship karma, prepare yourself either for relationships or for the life that you were built to live, to understand, to grow through. And then you'll find yourself much happier, much more at peace. And you'll probably, if you're a student of astrology, enjoy astrology so much more because you'll start to see just what it can reveal to you. Because oftentimes we've got blinders on. We're just looking in one direction. We just want to know about this 1-inch strip right in front of us, when there might not be anything in that 1-inch strip right in front of us. But if we just expand our vision 180 degrees, we can see all the potentials, all the opportunities that have been there all along that we have missed because we've been so fixated on putting a value on ourselves by relationships or a career or having the perfect child or whatever it might be. There's so much more there. And it's important to, at some point in time, trust that you are being taken care of. That if you bring your presence and your self-awareness into this moment, you might see things that you haven't seen before. You may realize that you need to look in a different direction or put your attention on something else. Meditation can be very helpful. Devoted spiritual practice can be very helpful. But just engaging that whole idea of living intentionally and seeing what's around you and focusing on the grace around you, what you can be grateful for around you versus what you don't have. If you have a spiritual practice, fantastic. If you need any assistance, there's another channel that I do called Kriya Yoga Online. So it's youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online. KRIYAYOGA Online. There's plenty of videos there helping you learn meditation. I'm also doing a monthly meditation group, online meditation group. You can go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com and then go to the Learn Kriya Yoga tab and go to about 2/3 down that page. You'll go through a few classes, but 2/3 down that page there's a listing of monthly dates for 2015 where I'll be doing a monthly meditation through WebEx. So if that's of interest to you, you might want to consider that. And you can let that be the beginning of your process to understanding relationships, because once you understand yourself, you understand relationships much better. And always remember, the 7th house in astrology is the opposite of the 1st. The 1st is you, the ascendant. The 7th is as far away from the ascendant as you can get. And that's your mirror. That's where you project. That's where your projections are. So whatever problems or great things you have in that 7th house, it's because it's a projection from your ascendant, from you. So there's always this dynamic interplay. There's always this dynamic interplay between the 1st house and the 7th house. They're always going to impact each other. And the point that you have, I don't want to say control over, but the capacity to work with is the 1st house. You, your personality, your projection into the world, your self-awareness. Focus on that first. Learn what that is first, and then you'll be much more prepared for better relationships, or more supportive relationships, or for your capacity to support others in relationships. Because that's really what this is all about. It's learning to be in this world as a support, not as a leech who's always trying to take and get and have your needs met by everyone else, but learning to be self-aware and be appropriate and supportive to those people that are around you, those reflections that are around you. And then relationships work out very well, typically, assuming you don't go through an occasional bad transit, which we all do. So consider these astrological influences of the 7th house lord and other houses for relationships. But be prepared to ask yourself the deeper questions about relationships for yourself. Okay, again, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll be in touch soon.